Master of Ceremonies for tonight's proceedings. And I would now ask that you rise and join John Yakubuski, our Member of Provincial Parliament for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke, in the singing of our national anthem. John?
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all thy sons' command, cartum brose porte la pea, il se porte la croix. Comme histoire est une épopée de plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you very much, John. And if you'd remain standing at this time, I would invite Julia Munro, MPP from the riding of York North, to say grace, and Phil Bannon, Deputy Mayor from the town of Whitchurch Stouffville and candidate for Oak Ridges Markham, to offer a toast to Our Majesty the Queen.
I'd ask you to bow your heads. Eternal Presence, we bow our heads in gratitude for the many blessings that you have bestowed upon us. Continue to give us the wisdom, health, and understanding that we need to keep us strong. We ask that you give strength and guidance to our leader, not only today, but in the months to come. And we give thanks for that food which we are about to receive. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and my duty to lead you in a toast to the Queen. Please raise your glasses. Ladies and gentlemen, to the Queen of Canada.
We're running just a little bit behind, and Frank Cleese told me it's my job to get us out of here on time tonight, and we plan to do that. I want to start with a little entertaining skit. Frank asked that since some of us may not make it home for the national news tonight, that I arrange to have a recording of the national news provided to the audience this evening. So we'll start in the U.S. Good evening, I'm Larry King, and we now throw things to Canada at the Le Parc Banquet Hall, where Peter Mansbridge is on hand with the national news. The National with Peter Mansbridge. Good evening. In the news tonight, we go to the Le Parc Banquet Hall, where Tory is raising more Tory dollars for the big campaign. Joe Schlesinger's on hand with this report. Joe? Peter, another day, another time on the campaign trail, and they came out by the thousands to greet Tory in Tory and Richmond Hill Markham tonight. There was Joe Clark. We as Canadians can show our support pour Mr. Tory and his caucus. Parce que le caucus est le parti progressiste conservateur c'est très bien d'Ontario. There was Henry Kissinger. I want to thank John for the invite tonight, and we look forward to supporting him on the trail. There was John Turner. We're here because we're here because we're here because there's Scotch. There was Bob Runciman. Well, we just want to thank everyone, and certainly from Leeds Grenville, for joining John in the caucus tonight. There was Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well, I was able to sneak back into town, and I want to congratulate John and wish him the very best on the campaign trail.
There was Presto Manning, fresh out of Western Fraser Institute think tank. You know, it's not a matter of whether we've got the support or not support. It's a matter of whether we can come together and work on policy and support John and his caucus to the polls in October. There was Brian Mulroney. We have an obligation to be as supportive as we can. Mr. Tory, I say, is the man that can make the difference for Ontario in October. There was Hazel McGallion. I just want to say that I bring the greetings from the people of Mississauga. There was Mike Harris. Well, I wanted to say that Laura and I, we're delighted to be here tonight and to join John and all of you. There was Billy Clinton. All I want to know from Sam Ciccolini is where the closest cigar bar is. There was Bill Davis. Well, I certainly want to say that on behalf of the people of Brampton, on behalf of Kathy, our children and our grandchildren, I'm certainly delighted to be here tonight. You know, John Tory was never a great football player, but he was a pretty darn good commissioner of the CFL. But nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, I'm always amazed when I see Hazel here, and I certainly say that it's always interesting, because if I were still the Premier of the province of Ontario, I'd suggest that we not be sitting in the Greater Toronto area tonight. This would be the Greater Brampton area. There was George Bush. We know. We got him on the run. And when you get him on the run, they're running. And when they're running, you can catch him. But you can only catch him if you get him on the run. But we got him on the run. There was Jean Chrétien. I don't know why I'm here, but all I can say that John Tory, he has the plan, he has the people, and together they can make it happen. There was Ralph Klein. Well, I wanted to say to John and certainly to Barbara that Colleen and I are delighted to be here tonight. We bring greetings from all of those Ontarians that have moved to Alberta, but we're sending them back in October with their votes, John. And there last was Willie Nelson singing that famous song, I once was lost, but now I'm found. And I was blind, but now I see. Joe Schlesinger, CCCVideo, and look on John Tory. That's the news. And I'm Peter Mansbridge. Good night. And I know that's the shortest speech you've ever heard Bill Davis give. But no disrespect, sir. Now, this time I would like to acknowledge the co-chairs of tonight's dinner who have worked tirelessly to make this event such a success. Frank Cleese, our MPP for Oak Ridges. Julia Monroe, the MPP for York North. Regional Councillor Joyce Frustelio. Sam Ciccolini. Paul Bailey, Gaston Germain, Shahid Hashmi, and KK Lee. Thank you and your committee for all of your hard work tonight. We're also pleased to have a number of special guests in attendance with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard his voice earlier, and now please join me in welcoming the former Premier of the Province of Ontario, the Honourable William Grenville Davis. We're also very pleased to have a number of municipal elected officials in attendance. Too many to introduce individually, but we sure are glad that you're here, and for the work that all of these people do in their communities. On behalf of the people they represent, I would ask all of the mayors, deputy mayors, wardens, reeves, councillors, and any elected officials with us tonight to please rise and be recognized and thanked by this audience. Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming members of October's All-Star Team, the Ontario Progressive Conservative Caucus, and John Tory candidates for York Region.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Frank Cleves.
Good evening, everyone. Friends, I want to, on behalf of my colleagues behind me, extend the warmest welcome to each and every one of you. At the outset, I want to apologize to the many twisted arms that are here tonight in my role as co-chair of this great event. But I can tell you that it was worth it. We have a mission ahead of us, and without your help tonight, we would not have been able to do it. It's my pleasure to introduce to you today the man who's going to be the next Premier of Ontario. John Tory is someone who I have come to respect highly simply because he is a man of integrity. John Tory is someone who is going to create for us in the province of Ontario a contrast between someone who will say whatever needs to be said to win an election and someone who will say only what he is prepared and able to do. John Tory. John Tory is someone who we can all get behind. I can tell you on behalf of my caucus, there is not a leader of any party who works harder and is more dedicated than John Tory, and as a result of that, he will be the next Premier of this province. Ladies and gentlemen, John Tory.
know, there's times when I wish they'd stay up on the stage with me, so if the speech goes badly, they can share it with me, but it doesn't seem to work that way. I think there's probably a number of you who think this job is easy, and I just want you to know it's not easy. You'd think being Dalton McGuinty's chief critic would be like shooting fish in a barrel. But I want you to know my mother calls me twice a week and asks me when I'm going to get a real job and why I'm doing this. And there are moments when your past confronts you, and I want to share one of those with you, because I had the privilege not too long ago of speaking at the 100th anniversary breakfast for the Scouting movement in Canada. And I should tell you that very same mother, who of course I love immensely, she brought me last week because she heard I was doing this and she thought maybe I could use it, my own Scout jersey from when I was 17 years old, and for whatever reason, best known to her, she's been saving. But in any event, I was the speaker there, and just before I was to speak to this big crowd of 1,000 people, I saw in the crowd my Scoutmaster from when I was a Boy Scout, which of course would now be almost 40 years ago. And I've been carrying around a burden with me for all these years, and I thought it was time to throw off the shackles and to deal with this matter for once and for all. And so in front of those 1,000 people and my old Scoutmaster, I confessed that almost 40 years ago that I had indeed used lighter fluid and newspaper when I was doing the fire lighting test. Now I did point out, as you might expect me to do, that all of the others who were taking the test that morning had joined me in a conspiracy to use the lighter fluid and newspaper, but I did unburden myself, and I felt much better after I'd done it. So if you think this job is easy, it's not, because you're confronted by these things all the time. Frank, thank you for, not just for your kind words of introduction, but Frank Cleese and Julia Monroe have been our representatives on such a stalwart and steadfast basis in the York region, and have done this region proud with the kind of representation they have provided for a number of years. I want to, of course, say a sincere word of thanks to each and every one of you for being here. There's a number of people I see at the receptions and so on who I've seen at other events we're having, and I often feel a bit guilty about that, but you're the ones that accept the invitations, and I'm just delighted that you come, because it's supporting the democratic process, and I think it is supporting something that is important for Ontario, which is us offering to people a realistic, responsible alternative to form the next government of Ontario come October the 10th. And I want to say thank you as well. Of course, Frank was very involved, as are others that are listed on the program, but they had a wonderful committee of people who helped to put this dinner together. Frank and Julia were both co-chairs, and the group has done a wonderful job. And most important of all, to say thank you to each and every one of you for being here, because your presence makes these events a big success. I'm also, thank you, please give yourself a round of applause. I hope that you noticed we had a convention a week or so ago, and at that time, I guess it was 2 weeks ago now, but one of the proudest and happiest and most momentous moments of that convention for me was the first time that all of our candidates were brought up on stage together. And that, of course, includes the 25 caucus members who we have at Queen's Park, many of whom were here tonight and were introduced. And they have done a wonderful job, not just fighting on our behalf in the legislature, not just representing their constituents, but they've helped me. I came to this job as leader of the party without experience in the legislature, and you know, one of the things that you have to know when you're in a position like this is what you don't know. And they've been immensely helpful to me and immensely loyal to me in helping me to learn this job and do the jobs that they do so well each and every day, and I'm very, very grateful to them for the job they do. But we've also been able to attract, and they came up on stage at the time of the convention, and some of them here tonight, a wonderful group of new men and women from all corners of this province, from every walk of life, who are joining a tremendous, diverse team of men and women who are ready and willing and able to stand up for a better Ontario when we are elected on October the 10th. And I want to say thank you. Get closer to the election, it seems that more people here in York region and around the province are turning their attention to the state of the province. People I meet tell me they're concerned about Ontario. They're concerned about our missed opportunities and, frankly, very concerned about our diminished standing as a province. They know in their hearts that after 4 years of Dalton McGuinty, things just aren't right. And they know that particularly well even this week after the Auditor General released his review of the Ontario government's pre-election report on finances. And in that report, the Auditor General of this province, himself an objective officer of the legislature, for the second time in 6 months, criticized the McGuinty government for irresponsible year-end spending sprees. And I can tell you right now, that is a practice that will end when a progressive Conservative government takes office in October. My friends, that is one thing the Liberals have to answer for after 4 years, but they have a lot more to answer for as well. The people I meet across Ontario, they expect answers. They expect real leadership. People know leadership when they see it. Leaders set an example. Leaders keep their word. These are basic concepts. Leaders are not afraid to make tough decisions. Leaders have a plan. Leaders want to be measured. They want to be accountable. And if you think about it, think back, not too far. Ontario was once the leader in all of Canada. We were the economic leader. We were the cultural leader. We were the political leader. And more. We have been blessed in this province. This is a big province with tremendous resources and a remarkable, diverse, and hardworking population. But what made Ontario a leader, it didn't happen by accident. It didn't just happen by good luck. It happened because Ontario had leaders. Leaders who set big goals, who held themselves accountable for those goals, and then brought Ontarians together so that we could achieve those goals. Today, I think it's true to say, and many of you will reflect on this and know that it's true, that for the first time in the history of our province, many people believe that their children will not be as well off as they are today. Well, I can tell you right now, that kind of a standard, or accepting that kind of a future for Ontario, is not good enough for me. And I know it's not good enough for you. And so in October, Ontarians will face a historic choice about the kind of leadership they want. I know that Ontarians believe that leadership matters. So almost 2 weeks ago, we laid out our plan for a better Ontario. And I made it very clear from the outset, with my colleagues, many of whom are here tonight, that this was more than an election platform. It was a plan for government. It was a plan that would keep our budget balanced. It was a plan that includes only those commitments that we can meet. And Frank made reference to this. It's a plan that looks to the future and aspires to what Ontario can and should be. We call our plan for a better Ontario, Leadership Matters. And you know what, my friends? It does matter more than ever. Our plan is built on the premise of smart planning and real results that benefit everyone. It's not about creating divisions. It's about coming together to create a stronger Ontario. And tonight I'd like to talk to you about 3 areas of focus in that plan. The first is healthcare and hospitals. I think if we're being honest about this, our healthcare system remains in very poor shape. More than 1 million Ontarians, including more than 130,000 children, are without a family doctor. Many parts of York Region, right here where we are designated as underserviced for family doctors. I was recently at the Markham Stouffville Hospital for a tour. I met with the staff who told me they are still looking for word on the needed expansion of a hospital that was built to serve a community of 155,000 people. In less than 2 decades, that same hospital, serving that same community, is now expected to serve a community that has grown to be 300,000 people, and yet they're sitting there waiting for word on their expansion. Even more disconcerting in a way was a nurse telling me that if you took a child in suspecting mental illness, and that's why the parent had brought the child to the hospital, it might be a year before they could see a psychiatrist and be properly diagnosed in the province of Ontario. A year. When I asked what the chances were that that child might fall into a very dark hole of some kind during that long wait of a year, I was told those chances were very high. Nothing has been done about that on Dalton McGuinty's watch. And ladies and gentlemen, that is what I'm talking about. That's what I mean when I say there has been no leadership. We are not afraid to lead. A John Tory progressive Conservative government will make significant annual increases in investments in our healthcare, so that by the 4th year of our mandate, total funding will be $8.5 billion more than current annual Liberal spending. But we'll do it a lot different, because we're not just going to spend. It isn't just about spending more, it's about spending smarter. And the first thing we're going to do is to target the healthcare funding where it's needed the most. And that, I can assure you, absolutely will include catch-up funding for high-growth areas in Ontario like the 905 region. will include long overdue improvements such as electronic health records. It is unacceptable to us that the government of Ontario has spent $500 million on this sort of thing, trying to develop an electronic health record without a single accomplishment to show for it. Nothing. There is no health record. They spent more than $500 million on this without anything to show, and all the while, the doctors and the nurses, you know this because you see it, continue to be burdened for hours on end with old-fashioned paperwork. Well, I think it's about time we freed up those doctors and those nurses from this bureaucracy so they can spend more time where they should be, which is on the front lines and at the bedsides, actually providing care to patients. We will plan for the future and support healthcare professionals, ensuring that we develop and attract and, perhaps as important as anything else, retain the skilled health providers who are in our province. We won't be afraid to innovate. We will embrace ideas like more nurse-led clinics to reduce the strain on our emergency rooms and give the families more of the kind of peace of mind that they deserve. And yes, I want to assure you tonight, that innovation will include some private delivery of publicly financed health care paid for with the OHIP card. We can get people off waiting lists and out of pain, get their procedure done. Off waiting lists and out of pain, get their procedure done at no extra cost to them, paid for with their OHIP card, and I can tell you right now, I will put patient care and getting those people off the waiting list and out of pain, as long as they can pay with their OHIP card, I will put that ahead of Dalton McGuinty's phony, ideological, and political posturing every single time I'm given the choice. And I can tell you as well, ladies and gentlemen, I have never put forward a plan that I wasn't certain that I could achieve and where I wasn't determined to achieve it. And we will make these significant additional investments in healthcare while at the same time gradually and responsibly eliminating the regressive, unfair, so-called McGuinty health tax. It will be done. Dalton McGuinty broke his election promise to Ontario voters not to raise taxes at all. And not only did he raise taxes, but he announced the most punitive and most regressive tax in the history of Ontario, the so-called health tax. Now, why do I call it the so-called health tax? Because the truth is this. That tax is not dedicated to healthcare at all. It goes into one great big general revenue fund like any other tax. And to make matters worse, it is an unfair tax that places an unfair burden on lower and middle income taxpayers. It costs Ontario jobs, and I tell you now, it can be done, and we will eliminate it. We will eliminate it. If you look at Mr. McGuinty's own numbers, and they're confirmed, and in fact, there's even better prospects given this week by the Auditor General, it shows that this tax can be eliminated. The Auditor General's report, issued on Monday of this week, says that budget surpluses may reach $1 billion a year for the next 2 years. That's what he said. Again, he's an objective officer of the legislature. And so when I see that kind of report, and we knew that was the case for Mr. McGuinty's own numbers, we say, let the people have back some of their own hard-earned money. People are struggling, especially those lower and middle income taxpayers who are the hardest hit by a tax that was brought in a regressive fashion. And what they need is a government that is going to show the determination and the willpower to make this happen, including the determination to eliminate the massive government waste that is going on in the Ontario government today. You know, my friends, it takes leadership to make big decisions like this. Mr. McGuinty won't make those big decisions, but we will. We will make those big decisions because we have to make those big decisions in the best interests of Ontario and the people of Ontario. But the second issue I want to deal with is crime and community safety, because we all know that leadership also matters when it comes to community safety and the level of violent crime that we're seeing on our streets. Here, perhaps more than anywhere else, we can clearly see the damage that is being done when the government of Ontario does not lead. I have met, I can tell you, in my very short time in public life, it's less than 3 years, I have met far too many mothers who have lost young sons to gun violence in the GTA.
I have been to far too many funerals and memorial services for young people shot in broad daylight, in schools, in churches, in the middle of the street, in our own communities. Did you see the children on television last week in Thornhill, at the school in Thornhill, right here in York Region? I don't know if you saw those children on television, describing what it was like when they were told to hide under their desks during a lockdown because there was a man outside that school with a gun. Did you see on the same television newscast the parents arriving at that school panic-stricken, as any parent would be because they didn't know what was happening to their children inside that school? The system, our system, is failing those families. It's failing all of the families. It's failing the police officers. It's failing the victims of crime. It is failing those of us, which means every one of us, who rely on that justice system to provide us with safe communities. And we have to make it work again. I can tell you right now, I will not wait until another tragedy happens if I'm Premier of this province and only then announce a bit more money or another review. That is the Dalton McGuinty approach, and I reject it completely. On Dalton McGuinty's watch, an interesting fact, on Dalton McGuinty's watch, 70% of those accused in Toronto homicides last year were already out on bail or probation or subject to some kind of a court order. I can tell you now, if we are elected to government this fall, stopping this catch and release spin cycle madness will be a top priority. We can't go on this way. Some of you will know that the Progressive Conservative Party proposed a law in the legislature to shed some light on the number of plea bargains and bail violations that, in my view, make a mockery of our justice system. We just wanted the government to record and make public the statistics on how many plea bargain deals and how many bail violations there were, so people would know. Dalton McGuinty struck that law down, and I can tell you, if we form the government of this province in October, we will pass it. We will pass that law. A progressive Conservative government will enhance support for police officers and work with the federal government to increase the number of police on our streets. We will enhance policing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because we recognize that most crimes now take place between midnight and 4 a.m. We will strengthen the programs that focus on early intervention and prevention. These are important things with the goal of helping out our young people in our communities so they have alternatives to the temptation of joining a gang. And there's one more thing we will stand very firm on. We will stand firm on the principle that there must be one law and only one law for everyone. Dalton McGuinty, go ahead and applaud him. Dalton McGuinty runs away from the principle that no one is above the law, no one is beyond the law, and no one will be considered to be beneath the law. Our government will say with a clear mind and a clear voice that no group can take the law into their own hands in this province, and that victims of crime must never fall below the mercy of justice. Ladies and gentlemen, we simply cannot afford 4 more years of Dalton McGuinty's inaction. If we're really going to tackle the issue of crime in our communities, then leadership matters. Now, the final issue I want to talk about tonight is that of gridlock and transit. I met a woman not long ago who travels by transit from Vaughan to Mississauga every single day. Day in and day out, she makes that trip on public transit. She's been waiting for 4 years, she told me, to hear Dalton McGuinty say anything about how he was going to make what is frankly a very difficult trip for her and a very long trip every day to and from better for her. After 4 years of inaction on transit, Dalton McGuinty made yet another big election promise. Now, you'll remember, if you look at his series of big election promises, you'll of course remember, I won't raise your taxes. And then, of course, there was, I will close all of those coal plants by 2007. And we could go on and mention, I will help those children with autism, honest I will. And it's a much longer list, but you remember those. His announcement that he made this week, a kind of an election-style announcement, of course, financed with your money, won't help the man who emailed me last week. And he emailed me to say that his daughter, who's a college student, had missed her final exam due to unreliable GO service, and he asked me when there would be some kind of a service standard to prevent this kind of grief for people like his daughter. Now, he and his daughter have also been waiting 4 years
to hear from Dalton McGuinty. I made a very strong statement on this about management of GO, and there are people who I know work hard, but all I said was, look, the people who are in charge of GO Transit have to be like everybody else who goes to work every day. And that is that there has to be an expectation on them that they will develop a standard and that they will adhere to that standard and that they have to be held accountable for the slipping service standards that have left too many people stranded or late for work or late for their exams, like the man's daughter that wrote to me. Now, some people found that controversial, that I would say such a thing. And I said, by the way, if they repeatedly failed to meet their own standard, then I guess somebody should lose their job. But you know, when people said this was controversial, I didn't understand what the controversy was about, because I said, look, they should develop the standard. I clearly said it isn't going to be 100%. We do have snowstorms. They don't control all their own tracks. But there should be a standard. And that's what leadership is about. It says you set a standard, you say what you expect of yourself more so than anything else, and then you stand ready to be measured against that standard. That's what leadership is all about, and that's what we need a lot more of in government. Governments have to be more accountable. It applies to GO trains, it applies to hospital emergency rooms, it applies to lead in water, just as it applies to every, and should apply to every other service that government offers and every single penny of taxpayers' money that they spend. It's called accountability, and it's going to be a hallmark of a progressive conservative government come this fall. You know, I say, ladies and gentlemen, for me, it's not going to be much of a departure, and it won't be for a lot of my colleagues either, because it's the only way I know. It's the only way I know. When I was running a big business, I didn't have the opportunity to sort of go in and appoint a task force or a blue ribbon panel to explain why I didn't make the plan that I set. I was there, and if the service didn't work properly, I was accountable. I went on television to take phone calls from the customers that I was responsible for, millions of them, so that I could hear personally from them when we fell short, and we did. We did, but believe you me, if I'd gone on and taken those phone calls over and over again, and we hadn't fixed the problems, Mr. Rogers would have been telling me that I was without work. That's the way it goes. You have to be accountable. It keeps us all focused every day. So our program, this program we released a week or so ago, it includes a comprehensive transportation plan for Ontario that will improve transit infrastructure, will invest in roads, will reduce gridlock, and will minimize the greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by gridlock. We will expand GO Transit's network to better reach unserved and underserved communities. We will plan and build and finance the rapid transit system in the GTA and work with transit authorities across the province, in all parts of this province, to build the transit systems they need for their populations. And we will adopt best practices, building on things like the successful Markham model of traffic management where it makes sense for our communities. And so when you see things like a big last-minute transit photo op from Dalton McGuinty, just ask yourself this question. Where has he been for the past 4 years when he has been the Premier of this province and been in charge of the government, and virtually no new transit at all has moved ahead during that time on his watch? Ask yourself why we should get excited about a plan that won't see 1 cent of new spending on transit until 2011. It wasn't lost on me that the last words of last week's big transit photo op spoken by the Minister of Transportation herself were these, and I quote, "Let's get out, let's get elected, and let's get the job done." Now, at least she was honest about what the real intention was of that photo opportunity. But think about this for a minute. Back to the question of accountability. Think about this for a minute. What do you think would happen to you at your work if all year long you showed up for work late, or you didn't show up at all, because frankly that this place was just shut down the last 2 or 3 weeks, because they didn't want to have to answer our questions. So that you didn't show up at all. You didn't follow through on your assigned word. You broke your word over and over and over again to the people you work with. And then days before your performance review is due, that you swore you'd do better next year and made a whole list of new promises, most of which couldn't be counted on until 4 years later. What would happen to you, do you think? Well, I think we all know that in most jobs you probably wouldn't have lasted the year to begin with. You wouldn't be around for your performance review. And yet that is the game that Mr. McGuinty is playing in Ontario. Ladies and gentlemen, our plan will support real transit initiatives. We will actually use the Greater Toronto Transportation Authority that Mr. McGuinty took almost 4 years just to set up. We're actually going to use it to help establish real priorities, because that's what it's there for, and to actually get something done. We will offer truth in taxes. There's a novel concept. We'll offer truth in taxes. Right now, when you fill up at the pumps, you have no idea where the money that you pay in gasoline and fuel taxes is actually going. Well, we're going to fix that. A progressive Conservative government under my leadership will guarantee that every cent you pay in gas and fuel taxes will go to better transit, better roads, and better bridges, and we will make that information public so that you can see for yourself. Within 5 years, every single penny of fuel and gasoline tax will be spent on transit and roads and bridges, and that will represent an increased investment in that crucial area of infrastructure of $1 billion each and every year when it's fully implemented. $1 billion of additional investment every year. You know, my friends, I think real leaders want to be judged by actual results after 4 years in office, not last-minute promises to do better. We will achieve results on transit, and we will be happy to be judged on them, and we'll do it in a transparent way, as I've discussed, so that you can see for yourself what's going on. And we'll be happy to be measured on that in 2011 when we're seeking re-election. We really want to be able to be in a position where we can proudly run on our record. We don't have to try and create distractions, as Mr. McGuinty's doing now, to take attention away from the fact that so many of the things he said he would do, he hasn't done. That's the fundamental difference between Dolph McGuinty and me. I'm sure he means well, but it's clear that when faced with these very real, very big public challenges, he will always take the easy path. Unfortunately now, though, the consequences of 4 years of the easy path is an election platform that he put forward in 2003 that's in tatters. And we see it in the vulnerable patients who are waiting hours and days to get the care they deserve. We see it in the violent gang and gun violence on our streets. We see it in gridlock that is worse than ever before. And we see it in a massive new wave of taxing and spending without results. Without results. People often ask me why I want to be Premier. And I tell them it's because leadership does matter. We can do better. We must do better. You know, I was at an event this afternoon, and I met a young woman there. She might be about 20 years old, and it was an event at a wonderful place called Oak in Mississauga that helps people with developmental disabilities. And she's probably about 20 years old, and she had the brightest sparkle in her eye and the most wonderful smile that you've ever seen. And she thanked me for coming to the event to express my support for that wonderful place, Oak. And she said to me, I had a stroke when I was 9 years old. She had a stroke when she was 9 years old. And she said, if it wasn't for a place like this, I wouldn't be standing here today telling you that, as she was telling me that she's going to, on July the 21st, I think it is, do a walk from Georgetown to Mississauga to raise money and raise awareness of this Oak for kids. And that institution told me today that on the very same day when they trotted out a new $1 million ad campaign, I'm sure it's going to cost $1 million, I guarantee you when the numbers come out it will, promoting some propaganda-based website they have, extolling their own virtues on the environment. And I thought to myself, the planning money that is needed for that Oak place is $1 million, so they can get on with planning and expansion they need to serve more than the 9,000 people they presently serve. They serve 9,000 children every day, right now, in 6 different locations because they've outgrown their present location. They need $1 million to get on with planning a new location. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be justice if I could have looked at that young woman in the eye who looked at me and had such a sparkle and she was so happy about what this place had done for her life and say to her, you know what, we're actually going to divert that money from this insane advertising campaign and all the money that's being blown on websites full of propaganda and give it to Oak to do their planning. Because that's what you do. Ladies and gentlemen, for leadership that understands the human consequences of the decisions we make, because there are human consequences to each and every one of them. The time has come for leadership that recognizes that your word means everything. It's not just important. Your word and the ability of people to rely on your word means everything. It means everything in terms of your integrity and the integrity of your government, but you also know, many of you as business people, that it is the only way we can build a consistent and reliable economic climate in this province and get people to invest and create jobs is if we have a leader who keeps his promises and does what he says he will do. It's fundamental. gentlemen, I respectfully suggest to you that for that better Ontario, we need new leadership. We need real leadership. We need a new premier and a new team of men and women who can and will make a difference. I am ready to make a difference as premier, and the outstanding York Region team and our team from across the province, many of whom you saw standing here with me tonight, they too are ready to make a real difference for Ontario. So let's work together to build a better Ontario. For a better Ontario, leadership matters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for the dinner co-chair, Sam Ciccolini, to thank John Tory for his remarks this evening. Sam?